you for joining us for today's event, the Reading Culture Advantage, Boosting Achievement Across the Curriculum. This is the final module of a 4-session virtual book study of Dr. Margaret Merga's book, Creating a Reading Culture in Primary and Secondary Schools, Practical Guide. My name is Susie Tonini, and I am the School Library Consultant for the Colorado State Library. Today, I will be joined by a very special guest, Gabrielle Mace, who implemented a school-wide plan to promote reading engagement with the academic mentorship support of Margaret Merga. Today's event is being recorded, and all registrants will receive an email with a link to the resources as well as the recording. All right, let's get started. We're going to quickly review where we began and where we are now. So in Module 1, we learned that extensive research shows that reading engagement and reading culture affect students' reading achievement. In Module 2, we learned the research-supported practices that promote reading engagement, and these practices collectively create a strong reading culture. Creating a reading culture cannot be accomplished by one person. It requires school-wide collaboration. And in Module 3, we learned strategies for change management to create stakeholder buy-in. And today we'll focus on the nuts and bolts. How do you successfully execute a reading culture action plan? After today's session, I hope that all of you will feel prepared to begin the process of evaluating the reading culture of your school or district and developing a plan to promote reading engagement. The 9-step reading culture action plan is a synthesis of Merga's ideas, and we'll drop a link into the chat for you to create your own copy if you haven't already. Today, I'll briefly review all 9 steps of the plan, and then I'll turn it over to Gabrielle Mace to share an example of making a reading culture plan come to life. Let's jump into the 9-step reading culture action plan. As we learned in Module 3, changing a culture requires involving all stakeholders. So step number 1 is to identify your key stakeholders. And in Module 3, we reviewed the reading culture review tools as a method of assessing opportunities for change, which is step 2. And finally, in Module 3, we learned how to empower stakeholders to commit using the Pyramid of Change model and strategies developed by Weld RE4 School District. Today, we pick up with step 4, which is to create a designated reading culture team. This is essentially your reading dream team. While fostering a reading culture is the responsibility of every stakeholder, the reading culture team will be your co-leaders in facilitating the reading culture transformation. As Merga states, distributed leadership throughout the school prevents reading culture initiatives from being viewed as the brainchild of one person and instead as a shared goal. In Chapter 4, Merga provides guidance on how to assemble this team. She recommends recruiting team members with qualities needed for facilitating change, and she lists those qualities on pages 95 and 96. But again, after you've been in that building, you've built those relationships, you probably already know who those team members are that you want to be a part of that team. After forming a team, the second step is to agree on the team's mission. What is the shared goal of your teamwork? For example, the team mission might be to lead school-wide initiatives to promote reading engagement. And the third step is to provide clarity about how team members will accomplish the mission by defining each team member's individual responsibilities and expectations of their time and commitment. And this will look really different depending on what role they have. And Merga provides suggestions of distributed leadership roles on page 97. A key to success will be agreeing on specific actions each team member will be accountable for. We've all likely been involved in a group project when roles and expectations were not defined, and it probably did not end well. So taking the time to really define those roles and expectations is truly an investment in your future success. For example, Merga suggests Struggling Literacy Learner Advocate, or SLLA, as a reading culture team role. And this is the person who is essentially a staff member who acts as an advocate for students who are reading below grade level. And the specific responsibilities of the SLLA are to ensure students have access to age and skill-appropriate materials that they're excited to read. The final step of creating a reading culture team is to share the team members' individual roles and responsibilities with the broader school community. And this ensures that everybody knows who to connect with when they have questions or feedback about different aspects of the mission. For example, going back to that SLLA, by communicating who that person is and their responsibilities with the broader school community, parents and classroom teachers will know who to contact if students who are reading below grade level need help sourcing books that they can both independently read and want to read. Okay, moving on to step 5. Now that you have a reading culture team, it's time to formulate and communicate a powerful vision. The vision differs from the mission. So the mission, for example, promoting reading engagement, is what we do now, and the vision is what we strive for in the future. And Merga cites John Cotter, who states that the vision should be clear in intention, appealing to stakeholders, and ambitious yet attainable. For example, a school's vision may be a future where every student discovers the joy of reading, empowered by research-backed practices that cultivate lifelong literacy and a love for learning. And you can steal that if you like. The step 6, agree on strategies. That's where the rubber meets the road. So to implement step 6, start by reflecting on those opportunities for change that you identified in step 2. Then review the research-backed practices for promoting reading engagement in chapter 2 and decide what will your school do to achieve your mission and vision. During this phase of step 6 of agreeing on strategies, make sure you include teachers. The phrase "nothing about us without us" absolutely applies to teachers, and Merga emphasizes the importance of educator ownership, contribution, and voice. Before introducing any changes to the school, involve teachers in co-designing the approach and determining the strategies for achieving the mission and vision. If you don't, there will likely be zero psychological ownership of the initiative, and it will be a bust before the process even begins. And another key group to include in this phase, I know it seems obvious, but sometimes we don't do this, is making sure that the students themselves are a part of agreeing on strategy. As Merga states, simply asking students what the school can do to support them to read more is an important step. Research indicates that children at both the primary and secondary level can have great insight into what would make them read more. But throughout this book study, we've learned methods for gathering this input. So Julia Torres' student surveys in Module 1, Donalyn Miller's reading habits conferences in Module 2, and the student interviews in Module 3. Again, nothing about us without us. Step 7 is communicating the change in every way possible. So informing your broader school community of the mission, vision, and strategies, ensuring that not only stakeholders understand the change, but they also understand on a personal level what to do to contribute to the change, how to be a part of it. This will require thoughtful communication and a thoughtful communication plan. So how will you communicate the mission, vision, and strategies to all of your intended stakeholders? For example, how will you reach parents with lower English literacy? Merga provides several suggestions on pages 101 and 102 for creating accessible communications. One of these examples is to create a video with multilingual subtitle options, or better yet, a video in family first languages narrated by a native speaker. As Merga states, if you do not adjust the accessibility of your content, you will only reach the highly educated parents and not those marginalized parents with lower English literacy, limiting the value and broad applicability of the feedback provided. The next step, step 8, is to create a clear and workable plan. And there's a template provided on pages 108 through 110. It's an implementation plan that clearly defines how strategies will be implemented, who are the responsible parties and their roles, the resources needed, and how success will be measured. And as you plan for resources, you may want to seek outside funding or partnerships. And Merga shares these 15 key steps for securing a school-based research grant, and she provides additional guidance in Chapter 3. So in the slide deck, you can click on the document image to print a PDF of this document, or we can drop a link into the chat. Finally, step 9 is to monitor and strengthen the change process over time. To achieve your mission and vision, the reading culture team will need to create methods for gathering feedback and evaluating progress. For example, there will need to be tweaks that you need to make based on stakeholder feedback. And you'll need to adapt to changes in best practices, changes in budgets, changes in students' needs. In other words, the transformational change that a reading culture change will be, it's not jello. It's not set and forget. It's truly an ongoing iterative process. Okay, so that was my bit. Those are the 9 steps of creating a reading culture at super fast pace. But now I'm super excited to dive into the nuts and bolts for you all to be able to see what this actually looks like in practice. I am thrilled to introduce Gabrielle Mace, joining us all the way from Sydney, Australia, as the head of Libraries and Information Services at Queenwood School for Girls, serving K-12 students. Gabrielle was the implementation leader of the Just Read program, a sustained silent reading program based on the research of Dr. Margaret Merga. So please join me in using your Zoom reactions to welcome Gabrielle. And Gabrielle, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Susie. I'm so thrilled to be here. Susie and Tia have put together an incredible book study for you. I've gone through all of those modules, and what I would have given 6 years ago to not only have Margaret's book, which she actually wrote while she was our academic mentor through Just Read, but if I could have had those 4 modules, that would have been extremely helpful. And I think I would have aged backwards during those 4 or 5 years rather than starting from scratch. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. Let's hope this all works okay. I always worry on Zoom. Let's see.
That's great.
All good? Great. Okay. I'm going to try and keep facing this way, although my second screen is over here. So I'm going to try and work through a pace at this, but I will also send through this PowerPoint. So if I go really quickly, do not panic. You will have this PowerPoint to have a look at. So who am I? Some of you may know who I am. I know that Susie sent through some documents to have a look or maybe listen. If you couldn't get through an hour of listening to my very twangy Australian accent, then I'll just explain to you. I have been a leader in libraries and school libraries and library services now for 15 years. And I've worked in single-sex schools, in all-girls schools, all-boys schools, co-educational schools, and co-educational schools that have had separate learning environments for boys and girls. So I am pretty well versed in how schools operate and how library spaces operate. I led the design and implementation of the Just Read program, and Margaret Merga was our academic mentor through that. We were given a very substantial grant, but I want to be really clear, this project was going to go ahead regardless before we were given that grant, and I'm going to get to that. I speak all the time on literacy, and the reason I do that is because literacy is at a crisis. We are facing a crisis around the world, and schools know that. Schools know literacy is a huge concern. When I say principals, I think that's administrators for you guys in the US and Canada. They know literacy is a huge, huge concern. So what you are doing now, and when you take this back to your schools, I want you, as much as possible, to not use the word library. I want you to start using the word literacy, because literacy makes principals listen. Because there isn't a school that isn't concerned about literacy levels of our young people. And we can thank mobile phones for that, and we can thank the saturation of our digital life, but literacy is the language you are going to want to start to be using. So have a look, jump on my LinkedIn after this, have a look at a lot of those articles, and I print a lot of the time through LinkedIn because I can do stuff in real time and I can get it published really quickly. When I publish in journals, it takes a long time. So I've left my LinkedIn there and my website, and this slide is all about the publications of the Just Read program. So that is what I've spent a lot of time doing, and that's there. And start reading all of those as well, because it gives you a lot of background about the Just Read program. So I'll talk to you really briefly about what Just Read is, and then what I hope to achieve with it. So Queenwood School for Girls in Sydney, Australia, in January of 2020, we implemented the Just Read program. It was a sustained silent reading program for 20 minutes every day. I knew that daily reading habits were going to improve academic outcomes and learning outcomes across all the disciplines. I knew that also a daily reading habit would increase well-being. I knew that. And I knew that if I made it fiction only, which suited the environment I was in for these girls, I knew it would build empathy. And that was a way of getting our pastoral team on board as well. But one thing you've got to be aware of before you even go, down that Just Read path or a sustained silent reading path, you have to come back to literacy is a whole school responsibility. It is not the responsibility of the English faculty and the library. And that is something that we need to really let our educators know in senior leadership. Literacy is a whole school responsibility. It's got to be looked at across the entire curriculum. There are literacy challenges in every subject. And sometimes looking at a whole literacy framework might be your way in to a whole school reading program. Because I can promise you, I can guarantee you, after you do this today and you go back into your schools and say, I want to start a whole school reading program, you are going to have senior educators say, well, that's just, a DEAR program and we're not going to do that. We're not going to change timetable. That's when you might have to come this way and talk about a whole school literacy project. And this is why I'm going to send you this PD, because I want you to be able to print this out and put it in someone's desk and say, English, science, maths, the humanities, the arts, the physical education, the technology and applied studies. Look at the literacy skills. Look at the reading comprehension, the writing skills, the critical analysis and the communication skills and the information literacy. Very high for everything. So you can see the overlap. So you might actually have to say, well, why don't we start with a literacy audit and then see if there's some wiggle room? And that's why I've kept this here too. That might be your way in to say, let's look at reading and writing, and let's look at disciplinary literacy across all those subject areas and who will be involved, and a whole school strategy, because that's how I did it. I had this in my background. This was going to be my whole school thing. And when I had reading and reading practices, writing across subjects, vocab development, use of digital literacy and student engagement, they are a perfect 5 to start with. And as you can see, 3 out of 5 were going to benefit from a whole school reading program. That's what you need when you go into those meetings and you demand a seat at the table who get a reading program. When people say, well, no, you say, but look at the value of this. 60% this hits 3 out of 5 things. So that's why I'm going to send you this PowerPoint, because you need to have this. But truly, every school will benefit from a whole school reading program whilst you do a bigger literacy audit. And that's a wonderful seat at the table to have, to say, I'm in library and I am really going to be heavily involved in a whole school literacy audit. So the Just Read program. So some of you will have heard of it. Some of you might have heard me speak or seen something online, but I'll explain to you, what it is for those who are less familiar. So in January 2020, Queenwood embarked on a sustained silent reading program, and that was reading for 20 minutes a day. So it was 80 minutes a week. So the fifth day in the middle of the week, we actually just had the kids talk about books, this peer discussion, and that was one of the absolute linchpins of why this was such a successful program. But 80 minutes a week, undisturbed silent reading for enjoyment. No one was tracking what they were borrowing. There was no requirement for written work at the end of it. All students, kindergarten to year 12. Now, I've had people say to me, well, kindergarten can't read yet. What are they going to be doing during that time? Correct, they can't read. But there is a wonderful thing called visual literacy. And it was, they were looking at pages, they were recognizing pictures, they were seeing the vector of how text appeared on a page. And it was about modeling. So kindergarten, 2 year 12, all staff, all students, all executive. So in January 2025, just gone, Queenwood entered its 6th year of the program. Now, I left Queenwood School 2 years ago. I went into a boys' school, and now I'm fully in a consulting capacity. But it won't ever. I can't see it disappearing at Queenwood. So it's not just linked to me. I left 2 years ago, and it's about to enter its 6th year. I may return to Queenwood to do some research this year about a longitudinal kind of study of where we're at. That 80 minutes a week equated to a young adult novel every 4 weeks if they didn't read the novel at home as well. So we had girls who'd gone from reading nothing to getting through a young adult novel every 4 weeks. That's extraordinary. So that is what the Just Read program is. And I knew that, and how I sold it was, academically, it's going to support critical thinking and communication and all kinds of academic success. And then I knew there was enormous wellbeing benefit to it. So this was my whole school literacy initiative when we were talking about a literacy audit. Susie spoke before about, you have to have an aim. You have to say, where do I want to finish? What do I need? What am I aiming to do? So this was our 4 key aims, and you have to just hold on to a handful. I can't tell you how many times we had 30 dot points on a page that we would have to bring down to nothing. You know why? Because teachers and people who work in schools, they can't synthesize that much information. So it was always, and I'm a talker, so I'm do 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 do. So I had to really learn to condense my message. So these were the 4 key aims. Create lifelong habitual readers who are passionate about reading by allowing full student choice on selection. Increase student enjoyment of reading and their own wellbeing through student advisory committee and feedback. We had students telling us what was valued and what was good. And I grew my whole library collection based off what they wanted to read, not necessarily what I wanted to buy, but what they wanted to read. So that was that thing of involving the students. We were going to increase student reading achievement across literacy indicators and building empathy and understanding of the world around them by discussing their texts in weekly book talks, and that was embedded student voice in the program. So they were our 4 key aims. I believe my mission now, my goal, is to get a free reading period on every single timetable in the world. I don't think that's too much to ask, do you? Every timetable in the world? And I'll tell you why. The benefits of it are immeasurable. Now, I think the US is very much like Australia in the way that teachers and people who work in schools are exhausted. I can see the nods. I can see the nods. You should see when I get up and I talk in front of a few hundred people and this sea of nods goes up and down. This is something that you need to understand as well. I'm not an academic. I've spent the best part of 2 decades in schools. It's where I'm happiest, and I'm a consultant to schools now. And I know that when people come in and they give us PL and they haven't spent 5 minutes in a school and they start telling a teacher what they need to do more without taking anything off the plate, you watch teachers lean back in their chair and they cross their arms and the looks start, and you've lost them before you've even stepped away from the microphone. So I want you to wrap your head around this. This was an initiative that was low cost. There was 0 productivity increase for teachers. It increases academic outcomes. It increases wellbeing, and parents are going to support it. You tell me the last time there was an initiative in a school you've been at that hit those 5 markers, because there aren't any. There aren't any. This is an incredible initiative that is so easy to get across. Like, it's not easy to get across the line, but when you start showing the benefits of this, and I can promise you now, not asking teachers to do more is your linchpin. It absolutely is your linchpin. So I'll just give you the background. We'll go back to 2015. Does anybody even remember 2015? Like, I can't even wrap my head around 2015. I think I was I think I was a much nicer, softer individual in 2015, 10 years ago. But we'll go back to then. So I arrived at Queenwood and I'd been appointed as, they accepted an appointment as the head of library services. Queenwood is a very, it's a prestigious school in Sydney, Australia. And I went there and the library was just so quiet. There was no one in there ever. And if people came in, the person who'd been there before me was a massive shusher. No one was allowed to talk in that library. So it was really quiet. The books were old. It just wasn't a nice place to be. So for 2 years, I rebuilt the library team. I said, I want quality library staff in here. We had staff changeover and movement, rebuilt the collection, demanded funds, got up and spoke at the P&A about why I needed this, 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 this. And I was so proud of the work that I did in those 2 years. And I sat thinking in 2018 and started looking at what lunchtimes were like and what the borrowing was like and blah, blah. And it showed no clear transference whatsoever. I was devastated. I was devastated because I thought, I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing here. Why is this not working? And it wasn't working because I hadn't captured student voice. I did what I thought was right. It didn't work. So then I was like, we have to survey the students because these girls aren't reading. I knew that. I knew they weren't reading. And if they had to borrow a book once a fortnight in English wide reading period, and we'll get to that later, the book would come back to me with the bookmark at page 3. I mean, is there anything more depressing than returning and then shelving a trolley full of books where the bookmark is on page 3? I feel like saying, just spare my feelings and just pretend and put it at the back of the book, for goodness sake, or even take it out. But I get that, and it was like a bullet. So we surveyed the students. And I can absolutely say, it's a question I get all the time. What's one of the first things we should do? Survey your students. That's data. If you don't have data, whatever research you do means nothing, because where's the improvement? And I don't care if it's anecdotal. I don't care if you observe and you diarise it. And I go through all this with my professional learning that I offer. You have to survey students. So this is what we had. Stages 4 and 5, so in Australia, that's ages 12 to 14, indicated 28% of those students were reading for enjoyment less than once a week or never. Stage 5, 10% of the girls were currently not reading anything at all, including their English set text. Can you imagine what it was like to go up to the head of English in the English department and have to share those findings? I felt like I was walking on a death march. I remember walking up there thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to go in there and say, yeah, look, 10% of the girls just aren't, they're not taking part in The Handmaid's Tale. I'm really sorry to hear that. And I'd be thinking, how are you sitting your final exam? They'd read a chapter that they thought they'd be examined on. They'd read the crib notes. They'd read whatever, and they wouldn't read the book. Now, a million years ago, when I was doing my final exam, remember, I read Brave New World 17 times. I was so worried about what I was going to face that I read it, and I read it. I didn't like it, but I read it. So 10% not reading anything. And this was a school that had wide reading lessons once a fortnight. Can I tell you now, they don't work. They don't work. So this sporadic time doesn't equal anything. And you probably know there's so many schools out there that go, well, we do wide reading once a fortnight. Do you think these students can remember what they read a fortnight ago? Do you think they bring a book with them? I would watch them come in. They go up to the shelf, they pick the first book they saw, and then they get comfy on the lounges and they hide behind it. I'm pretty sure some of them were napping. And then the accompanying English teacher would often mark. They'd find a desk somewhere in the corner and they'd mark or they'd prepare. So these wide reading lessons, if you have that on your school timetable, don't let people get away with that and say that that works. It does not work. So we had this survey, and I remember going to our principal and saying, this is student voice, this, and she was horrified when she saw this, because anonymous surveys, they tell the truth. And I was leading the Q Literacy Committee. It was the Queenwood Literacy Committee at that stage. And we'd been talking a little bit about how we were going to really improve literacy outcomes. And I've long been a believer in free reading. So I went to the principal and I said, could we just try it as a pilot in term 4, just once a week? Could we have the girls and staff read first thing in the morning after the roll is taken? And that's something called a tutor period. And we had 15, 20 minutes in the morning. And I actually got that over the line quite quickly. I want to explain why. Term 4 in Sydney, Australia, it goes into our very hot, long Christmas summer holiday break. And once a week, I could get that over the line where I delivered books to classrooms, spare books. They were welcome to bring a book in with them. And we explained to teachers that's what it's going to be. Mark the roll, because it was a very social time, really. It was quite wasted time. They'd mark the roll and they'd have a bit of a chat. And so once a week, it was a Wednesday, we asked them to read. We hadn't come up with the just read yet. It was sustained silent reading, SSSR. And, you know, I walked around and not all girls were doing it and not all teachers were doing it, but enough were doing it that we could see this could really work. This could really, really work. And so we said, could we go further with this? What could it actually be? And this is what it looks like. So the trial then needed to be extended to a daily reading program because we'd seen such great possibilities. So large timetable changes were needed to facilitate that daily reading program. I knew there'd be positive literacy outcomes, vocab, spelling, reading and writing fluency, and I wanted it to be fiction only because I did that because I know it builds empathy. I knew it would suit the girls at Queenwood. You've got to remember, I'd been there nearly 5 years at that stage. I understood the cohort. So I wanted fiction and no screen reading. They were not going to be on screens because we were asking teachers to do this. I didn't want teachers to police what they were looking at on screens. And I didn't want the girls doing online shopping or something like that. So the thing is, if a teacher looks up and everyone's got a book out, that takes a lot of responsibility away straight away. So I remember saying to somebody, well, it's only 4 things. Can I not just have those 4 things? So you can imagine I had some, what I say is very robust conversations around this time. I want this. And I was very, very insistent. And you can't tell, but I'm 6 foot tall and I wear high heels on a daily basis. And I would go into those rooms and say, well, here's the thing. You have got a student voice where they're telling you they're not reading. I'm showing you library documentation, which shows that our circulation is very low. I'm getting books back that they clearly haven't read. What more do we need? And I remember saying, can we just try this? Can we just try this, please? It's really very, very important. And that was the proposal we put together. We said there is going to be no digital devices. They're going to be reading from a book. The books will be self-selected and there is to be zero shaming with what those kids choose to read. And actually zero shaming with what the staff choose to read. Zero shaming. Novels were going to be works of fiction. 20 minutes every single day and in English only. And once a week for those 20 minutes, book talks where the teacher is quiet. Let the kids talk. Because even if they say, I didn't like this and I didn't like that, the amount of positive that came out of it. And do you know what was so annoying? I can remember recommending books to girls. They go, no, I don't think so. And then their friend recommended it. And then they wanted to borrow it. It's like when you tell your teenager not to do something and it's like, I'm going to do it until their best friend says not to. But I took that in because peer chat and peer review, so important. So that was what we wanted it to do. And I want to come back to those 5 things. Remember, low cost, zero productivity increase for teachers, increases academic outcomes, increases well-being, and parents love it. Out of 1,000 girls that I had at Queenwood from K to 12, I had one parent say, my daughter's not a reader and I don't really want her doing this. And my principal said, this is what we're going to be doing at Queenwood. I certainly hope that she will stay enrolled in our campus. You have to have a really tough head of school to do something like this, and we had that. And in Sydney, Australia, we were the first. We were the first school to do anything like this, which has been wonderful for our principal. Now, in the modules, which were just, I said to Tanya and Susie, those modules are incredible. They're really incredible. What I would have given for those years ago. And I saw all of these things, and these are your 10 critical points. And what I didn't realise is we were doing all of these during Just Read. We just didn't realise. We didn't realise because while we were doing this, Margaret was writing her book. So as our academic mentor. But if you base it around this kind of 10 dot points, they're very, very, very pertinent and important. The question I get asked most often when I speak and present about Just Read is, and this is what you'll hear. If you go back to your schools and you say, I really want to do this, I've done a great, book study and I've heard Gabrielle May speak about this and blah, blah. The first thing you're going to hear is, this is just like a dear program. Isn't this just like a dear program? We did a dear program in the 80s and the 90s, and this is just the same and blah, blah. This is so different to a dear program. The way I did this was so different to a dear program, and I want to show you how. First of all, we had something called a Q literacy committee. So the Q was for Queenwood, but basically it was the literacy committee. So, so, so important. One of the first things you would want to do if you change anything in the school is create a literacy committee. Don't rush anything. This takes years. This really does take years. That literacy committee was made up by 7 teachers across all areas of the school. We had someone from learning support. We had myself as head of library. We had a science teacher. We had people from our junior school, our K to 6. We had people from all areas of the school. It's so we would know what was going on in different departments, but all of those people resonated in a different way in the school. We had student advisory committees for student voice in both the junior and senior school who would meet every week. They came up with, competitions. They'd give me feedback on things. Student voice was critical. We had currently reading posters, which I'll show you, plastered all over the school all the time. Constant subliminal messaging around the Just Read. We had protected tutor time once a week for book talks, where I told you the teacher would step back and the kids were just talking about what they were reading, what they were going to read next, whether it was like a movie they saw, what character they were liking. We had visiting authors, and those authors were based on the books the girls were reading. Were they the authors I would have chosen to come in? No, but I realised through this, they're devouring this author right now, so that's the author I'm going to get in to speak. All our competitions were linked to Just Read, all of our competitions throughout the 2 years. Our social media campaigns, that's how we communicated with parents and the wider community. And other schools were watching our social media campaigns. We had student-led book clubs at lunchtime in the library, and they were so incredibly popular. I think at one stage we had 6, at a time. And anyone could choose what area they wanted to be in. We had cross-stage guest readers, and you should see how excited year 4 are when a girl in year 9 comes down to read aloud to them. I think I'm a good read alouder. I've got big voices and I'm a very physical person, but I would watch these girls look at this beautiful girl who would walk in her full school uniform and take up a book and read. And I'd often lean on the drama students and I would watch these little girls. And so cross-stage guest student readers, you've got that in your school. And I've seen it work in boys' schools where you get the really sporty boys who've got a lot of clout, and they might be the rugby stars or the swimming stars, and if you can get them in some way, it means a great deal. Peer modelling. I got into partnerships with local bookstores, and anytime I wrote in the newsletter, I would say, visit our local bookshop or visit our local municipal libraries to, sustain this book habit going forward. And we've got to support our local bookshops and municipal libraries. It was linked on our professional learning calendar. Anytime that we had professional learning, people would be like, when's Gabrielle getting up? I was like, give me a moment, I will. I just had a slot there. You'd have to get up and talk. And then we had staff focus groups where I'd feed people. That's another big thing. Feed people. Food is a big one. I would have focus groups and I would have made, chocolate chip cookies or something like that. People, and I'd say, tell me everything. Tell me what's going wrong. And I just made increased opportunities for reader advisory and peer recommendations in the library. So you can actually see that this was not, that's not a DEAR program. That's not a DEAR program. This was close to my full-time job for 3 years. It took that amount of work because I was really figuring out how I was going. I was troubleshooting it in real time. But definitely print that out if people say, well, isn't it just a DEAR program? Susie sent me through 3 questions just for me to think about, and I will tell you, you're all very smart and switched on because these are the 3 questions I get all the time. So, sheer logistics. How did it work? How did you actually get it on timetable? And when did you do it? How did you do it? And how did you get staff and teachers on board? So I'm going to show you here. You can see on the left-hand side, that is the original timetable for Queenwood. That's circa, 2019. And then you can see the proposed timetable for Just Read. Now, it looks like we took those periods from 70 minutes down to 60 minutes. What I need to tell you is you need to fully interrogate your timetable. What I can tell you is they were never these 70-minute periods, because our lesson would finish, the girls would pack up, they would move to a different classroom, sometimes a whole different building at Queenwood, get to a new classroom, unpack, blah, blah, blah. So when people were saying, well, we had 70-minute periods, I would say, well, they were never 70 minutes. I sat across from a deputy and said, no, they're not 70 minutes. I would say they might be 65. So let's forget the 70, because we've got no official movement between periods. So straight away I was saying we're working off 65 minutes. Now, when you talk about taking 5 minutes, and I think we all know as educators and people who work in schools, the last 5 minutes of any given period, they're switched off. They're starting to pack up. They're starting to put pens back on lids and blah, 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 blah. So really, after 60 minutes, this is well researched. That's about as long as kids can concentrate at a time. So getting it to 60 minutes was actually not that hard. You can see on that timetable, we formalised the changeover of 5 minutes to get them between classes, and we put reading in the middle. Now, one thing I will tell you, don't lengthen the school day to accommodate a program like this. You do that and you will be dead in the water before you start. And do not shorten break times. Oh my gosh, if you shorten break times, it'll be full-blown anarchy in the school. So I knew I couldn't lengthen the school day and I wasn't going to shorten break times. In fact, I did an extra 5 minutes with lunch and movement. I made it from 45 minutes to 50 minutes, but really it was just the girls moving towards the end. But you can see there, I sat it in the middle of the day. The reason for that was I wanted the girls to be reading with a different teacher every single day. They would read with an English teacher, a science teacher, a maths teacher, a physical education teacher. It was at the end of their period 3, and I used to see teachers at 12:04 say, stuff away, books out, and I saw kids on PE courts sit down, read, in science labs, all that sort of thing. And the modelling that did by seeing a different teacher every single day, and also it wasn't just coming out of English. It wasn't just out of an English period. Whole school literacy. Remember, whole school literacy. Literacy is a whole school responsibility. So the other thing is, as we all know, don't do it after lunch. If I could give you that advice, don't do it after lunch, and don't do it for the last 20 minutes of the day. After lunch, the girls are tired. You know, that thing of they're digesting their food, they've eaten, they feel safe and they're full, and that's not a time to do it. And if you try and do it at the end of the school day, they won't be switched on and engaged. What we did hear back from teachers are they are arriving to period 4 after Just Read relaxed, not sleepy, relaxed, but ready to learn, because they'd had a brain break, they'd had a screen break, and they had read, and then they'd moved classroom and they'd done it with their period 3 teacher. Now, if you do that, I promise you any school timetable can be interrogated. And if a teacher goes, well, we're just not going to do that, you come back to those 5 points. What else are you going to offer then? So, and I go through timetables. You've got to look at it in a bespoke way. I'm always happy to work with a school and have a look at a timetable, but nothing's impossible. But that's where we put it. How did we get staff on board? It just was constant. I had frequently asked questions. It was permeated our whole school all the time, to the point that when we would have casual teachers or a new staff member, they had a meet and greet with me. They spent 20 minutes with me, and I explained very clearly, part of working at Queenwood is the Just Read program. It's not optional. This is what you'll need. And I didn't let them leave until they borrowed a book for Just Read that day. And I had enormous support from my principal. And I still remember her saying to me, Gabrielle, no one is busier than me in this school. And I completely concur. No one was busier than her. And she blocked that out every single day in her timetable. You couldn't touch Elizabeth Stone, from 12:05 to 12:25. And she would join other classrooms. That was the other thing about this. If you weren't teaching that period, you were very, very much encouraged to join another classroom or leave your staff room and read in a visible way. It's that teacher modeling. And, if there were teachers who sometimes weren't doing the right thing, they got a follow-up email. And it had to be that serious that if you teach at Queenwood, and like the girls, if they really forgot their books, it would be, well, you don't forget a calculator or a protractor for maths. This is actually learning time. This 20 minutes is a gift to you, and you are going to start remembering this, or there's going to be some follow-up sort of, consequences. Apparently, my high heels make a very distinct sound on concrete. And when I would walk around sometimes at 12:05, all 6 foot of me, that you'd hear like at 12:04, she's coming. And that's a good thing. And the Q Literacy Committee would often do that. They'd spread out to different areas of the school. And it was collecting that anecdotal data as well, that visual data, that they're doing the right thing. So it was constantly, on the timetable and being looked at. This is an example of one of our Just Read posters, our currently reading posters. And I would say to teachers, and I hit every teacher in the school 2 or 3 times. That sounded awful. Didn't hit them. I meant I hit them up for what they are reading at that time. And as I say, I'd done 5 years at Queenwood, so I was a well-known sort of entity and staff member there. And I think me leading this was because that was successful in no small way because of that. And I remember saying to a teacher, look, your name is going up on that star with what you're reading, and if you can't tell me the title of what you're reading at the moment, the space behind you will be blank. And I said it lightly and kind of half joking, but then people didn't know if I really was joking or not, so they were going to tell me what they were currently reading. Because would I have done it? Possibly not, but it was just a light threat of please tell me what you're reading, because it was noted all the time. And what was so beautiful is the kids loved to know what staff are reading. They loved to know, especially our popular teachers. And I can remember one time overhearing some girls in the library, Mrs. Brown, a fabulous English teacher, loves Stephen King, loves it. And I can't read it. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. And I heard these girls in Year 9 say, can you believe Mrs. Brown is reading Misery right now by Stephen King? She really doesn't seem the type, while she's teaching us Shakespeare and Jane Austen. But it blew their mind open, because sometimes, kids think geography teachers read atlases in their spare time. Like, we don't. So for them to see that was such a powerful thing. So, constant, saturation. Any tips on what to expect? Is there a hump to get over before students or staff get excited about this opportunity? Goodness gracious, yes. What I will say is the drip feed approach is really, really important. Anytime you try to start a new initiative in a school, you're going to be met with resistance. You've got to have a really thick skin. You've got to have a belief in what you're doing that is absolutely unwavering. There's always going to be people who don't want to take part. There's going to be those negative naysayers who go, it's not going to work, don't like it, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? If you get 60% of the people over the line, that's a success. That is a success. And what you have now is what I didn't have 6 years ago, where you've got someone who's done it and been a huge success, and feel very welcome to refer those naysayers to me. I'm more than happy to jump on a conversation for 10 or 15 minutes and answer all of their questions. Or if you really want to drown them in information, send them to Margaret Merga's academic website, where you can read all her many, 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 many years of articles on why this is a success. And push that point, push those 5 points. When were they last allowed, not allowed, encouraged and insisted upon stopping formal teaching and learning or any kind of administrative work for 100 minutes a week? When were they last encouraged to do that and read a book of their own choosing? So you definitely will have negative naysayers. You can't do anything about that. You've got to look at your people who are your centers of influence. You will, if you watch the video that Susie's put in there about Just Read later, you'll hear one of the members of our Q Literacy Committee say, this was a gift. We gave our teachers a gift. And it was a gift that we gave our staff. And I really capitalised on that language throughout those 2 years, and several times throughout the project, I gifted books, where I literally brought the bookshop to the school, curated a few hundred titles, got people down after school, fed them, and they perused books. And these are teachers who hadn't been in a bookshop for years. They were reading syllabus documents and curriculum documents and all of that sort of, and the joy that they had and the conversation starters, it happened. It was just incredible. So for the people who say, it's not going to work, you've got to go back to that thing of it's an initiative that we need to try. It's been tried to great success. And one thing that was always in the back of my mind, and I wouldn't even say make this well known, but if it doesn't work, what's the harm? You can always reinstate an old timetable. This is not, we've got the nuclear codes here. We're trying to change something in our own school. It's not impossible. So we gifted books a lot to staff, and staff really stopped and just read, and it was so wonderful. What I would say is have a look on my LinkedIn, read that article called Embracing Change. And it's about getting people on the bus who don't want to be on the bus. And sometimes people will get on the bus and they won't sit down. They'll be standing up and they don't really want to do it, but they know they have to. But then you'll have other people who just love it, And that's what will feed your soul enormously. And there's comments in there about what teachers thought about the Just Read program. Okay, my last thing, data points, student surveys and literature reviews, follow up with teacher and staff surveys, do focus groups with students and staff. They can be really informative. And you can definitely look at circulation data and reading scores a year or 2 years into the program. But in your early days, your selling points are going to be anonymous surveys or refer them to the Queenwood Just Read project and program that did this really well. We had a big funding grant because no other schools were doing this. This is the reason we got the funding grant to do this, because when we did the literature review, couldn't find another school who had done this, which was tricky, obviously. Last couple of things, you're going to hear so much about, we've got to worry about AI and literacy. In our increasing digital world, it's never been more important to have strong literacy skills. I want to really emphasise how a daily reading program can significantly boost students' literacy skills, which is vital for navigating any kind of AI-driven world. Have a look at that, my latest article on that on LinkedIn that's been republished a number of times, and why reading matters more than ever when you've got people pushing back on you and going, well, we can't do a reading program, we're looking at AI. This is why it still matters. This is literally why it still matters. I'm going to hand back to Susie and go to the chat. I just want to let you know I have only been able to touch on this really lightly. This year I've started doing targeted professional development. I'm doing the US and Canada in May in 2 months. So jump on and we will unpack all of this over 4.5 hours with all the templates and everything about the literature review and all the timetable documents and all of that kind of thing. You've got my email there too. Always send me an email if you've got a quick question and you would like to know more. But I would love to see, as you've had an enormous book study here for 6 weeks, had me speak to you, follow this up with some great professional learning. I think that would be a really, really amazing thing. Okay, Susie, I think I'm just in time.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. There are lots of questions that have rolled in. I wanted to start off with asking about why you mentioned that one of the requirements was that books were in English only. What was your rationale for that?
Okay, so the rationale for that was in an academic sense. To get this over the line with our academic and our teaching and learning director and our academic staff, I had to say that there would be improvements in academics. And because the final exam they sit is in English, the majority of so is in English, then that's why the books had to be in English. And I didn't want it to be a time that they brushed up on their Latin or that they, was working on their Chinese or their French. I wanted this to be something that was for their well-being, but that's why, because it was linked into academic achievement. Final exam is in their written English.
Thanks. One question was about how do you approach students who just won't read, who don't identify as readers and are really may provide some pushback.
Yeah. So I think I certainly had referred to me a number of kids who said, I'm not a reader, I don't read. And I've written an article about that on LinkedIn and called, Navigating the Reading Slump and how kids see themselves as readers. And often what it is, when they say, I don't like reading, do you know what it really is? They don't like books they've been forced to read. and they might not even know that yet. They get sat in a class and they're told to read a book. I don't like reading a book I haven't chosen. I've left book clubs in a cloud of smoke when I haven't liked the book. And then we ask teenagers to do that. And so what you say to kids is you can read anything you want. Anything you want. But this is the program that we're doing. And so it's about reader advisory and getting them to a point where there's no judgment on what they're reading. And I had some girls picking up Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Story Treehouse and all of that kind of thing. But what I will tell you is when they look around and they realize that they're doing this for 20 minutes every day, they don't want to be bored, because young people and teenagers hate being bored. They're not used to being bored. So it's about giving them student authority and choice, and even making them part of student advisory and saying, if you're not as strong a reader, or you don't like reading as much, what could make this easier for you? And it is full choice, and for the first time in their life, they're not having to produce written work after they've read something.
Thank you. Next question is, thinking about that time when students are talking with one another, did you provide any scaffolding for that? Were there sentence stems or any preparatory?
Yes. Yes, so we did do that. Again, it was that idea. These are such great questions about not adding workload to teachers. So we had conversation STEM starters, and we had all of those kind of things. If teachers felt they needed it, if they felt there was a gap in the talking, what I heard back from teachers was very much Wednesday's book talk day. And so they weren't talking about the beach or the parties or fashion. They just knew that was what they were going to be talking about. And sometimes they'd be in pairs, and sometimes the conversation starters or the stems would just be on the whiteboard, on the interactive whiteboard in the classroom. But if teachers needed any additional help, we had a whole resource drive on our OneDrive that teachers could dip into and just flick straight up on the screen. So
Great.
when I say there was no additional work for teachers, yes, we definitely had those. And that's part of what's offered in my templates and resources with my learning.
Great. The question is about hearing back from students who have been in the program. Have you heard from graduates about their experiences and how it influenced their postgraduate life?
Oh, it's so lovely to hear. I have heard from students who just say, that they just adored that time, and they were very sad, to leave Queenwood as graduates and go straight into uni, or working life, or a gap year, and not have that 20 minutes a day. And I would say to them, you still have that. You just need to create that time for yourself. It's that time where you put your phone away. And they were girls who only did it for a couple of years before they graduated. So our younger ones who have done this now for years and years at Queenwood, um, I talked to them about muscle memory and how someone said, I'm suddenly finding the reading easier. And I said, because you're doing it for 80 minutes a week. You're reading a young adult novel every 4 weeks. Look at your vocab. Look at the way you're communicating with me. I said, this is incredible. And it's so popular with teachers that it's listed on our staff suite of benefits. When we talk about all the benefits of coming and working at Queenwood, doing the Just Read program, it's that well known in Sydney now that for 100 minutes a week, teachers get to stop teaching and actually read. And it's been incredibly transformative. And I do remember one little girl who moved schools, and the feedback she gave to her year coordinator, who checked on her a few weeks later, said, I miss Just Read so much. And she said, very bright little girl, and she said it's like Pavlov's dogs at 12:05. I'd almost go to get a book out and realize that wasn't happening anymore. So students on the whole absolutely loved it and valued it, and we changed the culture to a culture of reading at Queenwood, and we did it within 6 months, I would say.
I think that is the perfect question to end on. I'm sorry if we didn't get a chance to get to your questions. We're right at 5.
I'm happy to stay on. I'm happy to stay on for longer.
Yes, there are 2 more questions if you don't mind. One is about why fiction only? Does it have to be fiction only? And I know we chatted about this a little bit in your experience at the boys' school and how that was different.
Yes. So, no, it doesn't have to be fiction only. Look, the 2 things that I would tell you that are absolute non-negotiables is 20 minutes a day, and for it to be daily, and not on a device. Okay, they're the 2 that are absolutely non-negotiable if you really want to see great traction with this as a program. But I chose fiction only for a reason. I knew the girls at Queenwood. I understood the cohort, and we have a very, very strong pastoral care approach at Queenwood. And I knew to get our pastoral care team over that if I explained to them works of fiction develop empathy. There's an empathy building in the world around us that comes from works of fiction. Generally speaking, girls prefer that. So we just did that because I really wanted to link into research on works of fiction and empathy building. But if you're in a boys' school, and I'm talking to 2 boys' schools at the moment about designing a program, we're looking at the roadmap for this right now. If you need to start with graphic novels and nonfiction and autobiographies and anything else, that is fine. That is fine. You just have to create the framework around the reading program to say why you're allowing those kind of different genres. And there's nothing to say that it can't be tweaked. You might say, well, for the first year we're doing this, we are trying to develop a habit of reading that is lost. So we're going to make this as palatable to these young men as possible. And doing that, you'll get a lot more people over the line. You may get more teachers over the line. So absolutely does not have to be solely works of fiction. Not at all.
And then the final question is, did you have an ongoing survey element an ongoing survey or a post-survey element? And if so, what did you look at?
Yes. So we looked, I didn't get a chance to speak about this, but we did this and we were 6 weeks into this program when COVID hit. And I can tell you, I just said to Susie earlier, no matter how hard you think you're going to do something, a worldwide pandemic is not something I planned for. And we managed to keep going anyway. And we wrote this incredible article called Silver Linings of a Sustained Silent Reading Program through a worldwide pandemic. And it was so wonderful to get kids off screen who were learning at home and get them reading in the garden or reading somewhere. And we ran competitions about where are you reading, and saw teddy bears picnics set up with all little books in front of them. And we saw the older girls, doing like joint reading with each other and having like these online book talks. So we did measure it. We measured it when we were going to measure midpoint, but because of COVID, we had some advice really with Margaret at that time that we said we'll do a start point and an end point. And we measured vocab and reading ability, and we also measured, and I'm happy to send any of that through to you as well, and that's in the Just Read final report as well. But what I'll say is we measured it after a year. And so some of the best data I got were how the girls were feeling as readers and whether that was starting to shift, because they started enjoying it. They started seeing themselves as readers. But this year I will be returning to Queenwood and doing a longitudinal study because now it's been 5 years. And I think if you've got administrators who are just saying, well, what's the value of this? We've got to come back to, we know reading is an academic pursuit. We know when we do it, we get smarter. We know that our vocab grows. We know our communication grows. We know that we are really absorbing words in a different rate and a different level. And you feel good after you've done it. You really do have a different sense of going into the world. And so if you're going to put something like this together, think about what your data markers are, but definitely include general well-being, and not just of the students, but of the staff. If the US is anything like Australia right now, we can't keep staff in schools. We can't. And it's because they are burnt out and they're exhausted. And what a palatable, cost-effective, easy way to try something for a year or two in your own school environment.
That would have absolutely been a perk for me as a classroom teacher.
It's a gift.
Thank you. Truly, thank you again for joining us today from across the world. You have just been an inspiration. I learned so much from you every time I listen to you. I know I speak for everyone that we are very grateful. I also want to thank all of our participants. This is our last module. I'm really sad to see this end. Your willingness to participate, share your knowledge and experiences throughout the book study, it truly amplified and strengthened our educator community. Again, just thank you. I hope to just keep building on this reading culture that we've established here. I will be reaching out sometimes in the near future to gather your suggestions on what potential next steps might be. But in the meantime, if you could please submit feedback through that Chapter 4 reflection form. If you are requesting 5 continuing ed contact hours, please be sure to complete the entire form. There are 3 parts. If you're not requesting continuing ed contact hours, I hope that you'll still take a few moments to answer the program evaluation questions in part 2. This is the equivalent of my state library report card, and that's information that we share with our federal funders. I really appreciate it. So this concludes today's webinar. If you need to log off now, again, thank you for joining us. If you have time to stick around for a few minutes longer and chat, I would absolutely love the opportunity to talk with any of you and how you might apply your experience in the book study to your own schools and districts. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and thanks and good evening, everyone.